Welcome to BitBlitz Horror. Tonight, we plunge into an oceanic nightmare that defies imagination. If you enjoy chilling tales, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin. I remember the day I first stepped aboard the M/V Pelagic Dawn, feeling more excited than I had in my entire life. I was still fresh out of graduate school, having spent years studying marine biology, yet never having had the opportunity to experience real fieldwork. My name is Jane, and I'd been invited to join a research expedition to investigate deep-sea currents and the hidden marine ecosystems that bloomed in their wake. Little did I know that what we'd uncover on this voyage would force me to question everything I ever believed about the ocean, and perhaps even my own sanity. The first few weeks aboard the Pelagic Dawn were relatively calm. We set out from a bustling port, teeming with fishing vessels and cargo ships, their horns echoing in the early morning fog. For hours, I watched us slip away from the shoreline until it vanished entirely, no more than a slim purple line dissolving on the horizon. Watching that last sliver of land disappear filled me with a giddy excitement. At the same time, a subtle sense of smallness crept in. Here I was, afloat on a vast, rolling ocean, a realm filled with the unknown. Our mission was straightforward: gather data on oceanic currents, measure the biodiversity along several strategic transects, and delve into the mysteries of the deep with the help of specialized submersibles and advanced sonar equipment. Conventional objectives, yes. But we were heading into a region rumored to harbor unusual phenomena, inexplicable temperature fluctuations, illusions of underwater structures, and echoes on sonar that defied immediate explanation. We planned to remain there for at least 6 weeks, though that timeline would soon be derailed by events none of us could have predicted. My cabin was modest but comfortable enough: a small bed bolted to the wall, a narrow desk with a porthole above it, and just enough floor space for me to shuffle around without knocking into everything. At night, the hum of the vessel's engines lulled me to sleep. During the day, I spent hours with the science team, calibrating instruments, preparing water sampling devices, and logging the data that continuously flowed in. It was on our 12th day at sea that we first detected something strange. We were stationed about 100 nautical miles from the nearest shipping lane, deploying a remote deep-sea camera. One of my colleagues, Dr. Weber, had been fussing with a malfunctioning tether line. I stood beside him, waiting for the camera feed to come through on the monitor. The screen flickered, its pale glow illuminating the anxious faces of the research team. "We're at 500 meters," Weber announced. He tapped on the keyboard, and the camera angle shifted. The first images were typical of the deep: a faint silt haze, drifting particles, and vague outlines of rocky seafloor. Then, we spotted something that didn't belong: a tapered shape, too geometric to be natural. It slipped into view for half a second before the feed cut out into static. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaky. I mashed the keys, hoping to restore the video. This region was known for illusions on sonar, but the camera should have captured something real. "Did you see those lines?" "It looked artificial," Weber nodded, fumbling for the controls. "Camera feed's not responding. I'll have to reboot the entire system." He looked around at the rest of the scientists, who had fallen totally silent, eyes fixated on the static screen. "We can try again once it resets." That night, I was restless, repeatedly opening my porthole's cover to stare into the blackness. The ocean was tranquil under a moonless sky, though I couldn't see anything beyond the faint swirl of water tinted by the ship's lights. My imagination ran wild. I thought of how some ships have vanished without a trace, like the Warada, which simply disappeared off the coast of South Africa. I began to wonder if we, too, might stumble upon secrets better left hidden. By dawn, the cameras were functional again, but the scientists had decided to relocate the vessel slightly. We had a well-coordinated plan to use side-scan sonar in conjunction with the cameras so we could detect any subsurface anomalies. The day crawled by without any further signs of oddities, and I found myself lulled back into the routine, collecting water samples, analyzing the plankton we netted, and scribbling notes while the ship rolled gently on the waves. On the second night after our lost camera feed, I was awakened by a commotion on deck. I could hear heavy footfalls running back and forth, frantic shouting, and the taut clang of metal cables hitting the hull. My heart thrummed with alarm. Had the crane malfunctioned? Had someone fallen overboard? I sprinted up the companionway, boots pounding on steel steps. The deck was a frenzy of activity. Dr. Weber and a few of the deckhands were struggling to retract the submersible. The crane was locked at an awkward angle, and the submersible dangled precariously over the water, swaying back and forth with each wave. "We're losing tension in the cables," one of the deckhands shouted. "Check the hydraulics," another answered, trying to keep his footing on the slick deck. Through the swirling sea spray, I could see the submersible's camera was streaming to a portable console set on a nearby crate. No one was paying it any mind in the chaos, so I edged over to see what the submersible had captured before the mechanical trouble started. The screen displayed a staccato glimpse of the seafloor. Stifling a gasp, I watched as the submersible's light swept across something large, a black, rounded structure. It glistened like sponge or coral but had a symmetrical shape, reminiscent of a dome. A wave pitched the submersible downward, revealing what looked like bone-white spines rising from the dome. I tried to get a better look, but the feed cut off abruptly, replaced by a "connection lost" message. "What is that?" I whispered. Adrenaline pumped through me. The submersible was forcibly retracted onto the deck at last, scraping the side of the ship in a screech of twisted metal. Everyone backed away in horror. The submersible's exterior had been badly mangled. Deep rents sliced through the thick plating. An acrid smell of scorched metal wafted from it. "All stop on the engines!" the captain bellowed from the bridge, his voice carrying through the loudspeakers. We drifted on the quiet sea. No one spoke as the deckhands switched off the crane and locked it down. Weber, pale as a sheet, approached the submersible, running his hand over a half-meter slash in the steel hull. "What the hell could do this?" he asked aloud. It's not just an impact dent. It's cut straight through the plating." Trying to steady my breathing, I glanced at the water lapping against the hull. A few jellyfish glowed near the surface, ghostly and serene. Yet beneath that calm facade lay something powerful enough to rend steel. Exhausted, soaked to the bone, and thoroughly shaken, the crew retreated below decks. We needed to assess the damage, figure out what had attacked the submersible, and plan our next steps. In the labs, we replayed what little video had been recorded. That black dome, with what seemed like pale spines or tentacles around it, was all we had as a clue. And it was only a 2-second clip. I'd heard of terrifying creatures at sea, like monstrous octopuses rumored to snap passing sharks in half, as some oil-rig workers once claimed. Even so, logic told me that monsters in those stories were either exaggerations or extremely rare. But now, as I stared at the submersible's ruined plating, my rational mind felt precarious. For the next few days, a gnawing dread set in. The captain considered calling off the expedition, but half the principal investigators insisted we simply relocate. They believed the submersible might have encountered a geological hazard, maybe a hydrothermal vent, or a strong current that crashed it into a jagged formation. Others refused to believe any living organism could scar metal like that, though I noticed worry flit across their faces. Eventually, we resumed our plan in a new area about 40 nautical miles away. Many of us sobered up, pushing that horrifying incident to the back of our minds, telling ourselves it was some freak accident. Sometimes, as I walked the corridors or took my shift up on deck, I'd catch drifting whispers, stories told among the older crew about times ships had discovered drifting vessels with no one aboard. They mentioned the chilling distress call from the Medan, or how entire crews were found dead with twisted expressions etched on their faces. I tried to keep to my duties, but the nightmares I had at night only grew worse. In them, I saw the black dome from the submersible feed, only now those pale spines reached up, encircling the Pelagic Dawn like a monstrous kraken. A small stroke of routine comfort arrived in the mid-stretch of our expedition, calmer seas and bright, sunny days. We captured more plankton samples, measured turbidity, charted thermoclines. The ocean looked almost inviting, glittering under the midday sun. My friend Oliver, the marine chemist, joked that after all this ended, he'd retire to somewhere thoroughly landlocked, maybe Montana. I forced a grin, not betraying the underlying knot of fear that had taken permanent residence in my gut. But calm waters can hide savage tempests. One evening, just before we hit what the weather forecast warned to be a modest storm, we picked up an unexpected transmission, an archaic Morse code signal. Our onboard communications specialist, Kira, scrambled to decode it. Leaning over her equipment, I listened to the faint beeps. I expected some stray signal from a passing cargo ship. But the pattern was halting, inconsistent, sounding almost panicked. Kira frowned, scribbling notes. It's like an old distress call. But the words make no sense. It's incomplete, or in a different language. Hard to pick out. I keep hearing something about seafloor, pain, and a repeated phrase that translates roughly to work undone. She paused, looking up at me. We shouldn't be picking this up. The nearest vessel is at least 200 miles away. A creeping chill ran along my spine. Another piece of the puzzle. Or maybe just another nightmare. I recalled the story of the Medan and its bizarre final message. I die, before it vanished into smoke. Is that what was happening here? A ghostly echo from some ill-fated ship? We charted the signal's approximate origin, and discovered that it emanated from the same general direction where our submersible had been damaged. Against half the crew's better judgment, the captain decided to head that way. He was a pragmatic man, but also believed it was our duty on the high seas to respond to any sign of distress. Tension seeped through every conversation. That night, I went to bed in a swirl of worry and curiosity. We arrived at the coordinates by mid-afternoon the next day. The storm we'd been expecting grew into a savage squall with howling winds and towering waves. The Pelagic Dawn pitched at frightening angles, forcing me to cling to railings as I followed the captain to the bridge. An acrid sense of déjà vu washed over me. Once more, we were about to attempt a deployment, this time of a small, unmanned ROV rigged with multiple cameras. Waves lashed the deck, and lightning forked across a dark sky. Yet the crew scrambled, flipping latches, paying out cables, and lowering the ROV into the churning water. The feed came on, flickering across multiple screens on the bridge. The ROV's lights cut through swirling sediment. We sank deeper and deeper, the surface soon out of sight. A hush fell over us. At a depth of around 400 meters, something large flickered into view near the edge of the camera's beam. It was a shape reminiscent of a partial arch, riddled with what looked like organic growth, maybe barnacles or coral polyps. Then, as the ROV turned, the form resolved into a battered hull. My jaw dropped. It was a shipwreck. Rust-eaten metal, barely recognizable, lay slanted on a rocky outcrop. The name was impossible to read, but it appeared to be missing large chunks of its structure. There's no record of a wreck in this area, I whispered. We guided the ROV around a corner. The lights fell onto what looked like a gaping tear in the hull. It was big enough for the ROV to enter, but the inside was twisted, heavily encrusted with marine life. That's when the camera feed began to flicker, and I glimpsed something that made my heart stop. Clinging to the wall of the wreck was what looked like a webbed mass of tendon-like fibers. It pulsed. The ROV's camera lingered on it, the beam reflecting an oily sheen. Then those fibers unfurled like a creeping vine, slithering along the interior wall. My breath caught in my throat. The rest of the crew had no words. Suddenly, the ROV's video cut out, the screens going black. On deck, we saw the tether lines jerk and thrash violently. It was being pulled deeper, some unstoppable force hauling the ROV far below crush depth. The lines snapped with a deafening twang. Then, everything went quiet except for the shriek of the storm outside. We'd lost our second submersible device in just under 2 weeks. "They'll never believe us," someone on the bridge muttered. The captain turned away, fists clenched, and barked orders to hold our course. The Pelagic Dawn groaned under the pressure of the pounding waves, but we steamed away from that spot. During that next night, as the storm raged outside, I sat in the mess hall with a handful of fellow researchers. We were exhausted, filthy, and above all, terrified. Talk inevitably drifted to bizarre oceanic occurrences from history, vanishings, ghost ships, strange signals. I recalled the old accounts of giant sea creatures rumored to snap masts in half, and how the violent sea off certain coastlines was said to devour entire vessels with no trace. Oliver recounted a story he'd heard from a colleague in the Navy who claimed they once picked up an unrecognizable screeching on sonar that sounded like metal grinding, but was never identified. "I used to shrug those stories off," he admitted, eyes dark. "Now I'm not so sure." I barely slept that night. The ship rolled mercilessly, and the wind howled like some enraged beast. Days bled into each other as we retreated from that cursed area. None of us wanted to linger near the discovered wreck and that abomination the ROV had recorded. The captain charted a course that would take us out of the region altogether, but the ocean seemed determined to trap us. Not long after we left, we encountered mechanical failures. The generator sputtered, the radar lost calibration, and worst of all, a hairline crack in the hull threatened a slow but steady leak in one of the forward compartments. It was as though we'd awakened some ancient malice, now reeling us back in. On the 6th day of our forced retreat, we struck calm waters. The storm had dissipated, the sun rose warm and bright. But the mood aboard felt bone cold. Most of us were living on adrenaline-fueled anxiety, trying to patch up the ship and keep it limping towards safer routes. I spent hours below deck, rummaging through logs, cross-referencing shipping records, searching for any vessel that could match the partial shape we glimpsed. Perhaps we could find an explanation for the wreck, or for the bizarre, pulsing growth. But the older the records were, the less clarity I found. Legends swirled about vanishing ships, sunken mysteries, and nameless, half-mythical beasts. None of it offered a tangible explanation. That night, I was jolted awake by an alarm. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors, and a siren screamed overhead. Throwing on a jacket, I dashed out to see people scrambling, fear etched onto their faces. "Hull breach in the starboard hold!" an officer shouted. "We need all hands to secure it!" I hurried with them down the passage to the starboard hold. Water sloshed along the floor, rising dangerously fast. The metal hull groaned like a wounded animal. At the sight of the breach, we discovered that the hairline crack had ballooned into a jagged rent. Seawater poured in with unstoppable force. We tried to rig watertight seals, but it was no use. The patch kits, the welding gear, the water was coming too fast. The captain ordered us back, sealing the bulkhead behind us, sacrificing that entire hold to the ocean to protect the rest of the ship. Panting, soaked to my skin, I listened as the starboard hold filled. Another patch of the ship gone. Another step toward a watery doom. But as I turned to leave, I glimpsed something in that swirling water, a slick coil of grayish matter, rising from below. One of the deckhands saw it too, mouthing in horror as if to say, "What is that?" We both locked our eyes on this coiling shape that wriggled in the water like a serpent. Then the door slammed shut, the watertight seal engaged, and I heard the clang of the final locking lever. I was left trembling, a scream stuck in my throat. The officer chased us away from the danger zone, urging everyone to brace and regroup on the upper decks. Up on the main deck, the moonless sky offered no comfort. The ocean was quiet, as if holding its breath. The sealed hold was lost, but the Pelagic Dawn remained afloat, listing only slightly to starboard. The captain convened an emergency meeting. We decided to keep forging ahead, aiming to reach a known shipping route or a Coast Guard station. We were done with deep-sea research. We just wanted to survive. Rising dread, though, made it impossible to relax. Late that night, I wandered toward the stern. Beneath the glow of a single floodlight, I watched the water churn behind us, a silver-white froth in our wake. A memory flashed in my mind, rumors from a research forum about a floating platform that encountered monstrous swells near Hawaii. Waves so tall they nearly overcame the platform's deck. Catastrophes can rise out of nowhere in these waters. The sea is no gentle caretaker. Just then, I thought I saw something break the surface in our wake, a hump of wet black flesh. Could I have imagined it? My heart hammered. I squinted, but the shape submerged, leaving only ripples behind. Shudders battered my whole body. I had the distinct sense that I was being watched. By midday, thick fog set in. The Pelagic Dawn crawled through the gloom, navigation instruments struggling to interpret the environment. We used the horns intermittently, trying to avoid collisions with any phantom ships. The tension below deck was unbearable. Some of the older seamen talked in hushed voices about cursed voyages, like those in stories by William Hope Hodgson, tales of horrors that stalked the night watch. With every minute that ticked by, I felt that something watched us from below, waiting for the next moment of weakness. The final confrontation arrived in the small hours of the following morning. I'd just woken from a fitful sleep and slumped off to the galley to grab some coffee, when I heard a guttural, metallic-sounding noise resonate through the hull. A dreadful hush followed. Then pandemonium. Shouts erupted from the deck, calls for help, and the crash of something massive striking the bulkhead. Bolting upstairs, I burst onto the deck to find the entire starboard rail twisted, battered inward. A hulking shape loomed partly out of the water. It looked vaguely like that black dome from the camera feed, only now it was on the surface, glistening in the floodlights. Those white spines or tentacles radiated around it, latching onto the hull with obscene strength. Crew members scrambled in every direction. One man was thrashing on the deck, pinned by a coil of that writhing mass. I saw it tighten, and his screams abruptly fell silent. My stomach clenched, and for a moment, pure horror froze me in place. Then I rushed toward the nearest tool chest, flinging it open to seize a flare gun. Another researcher, wide-eyed, did the same. We fired flares at the monstrous form, hearing them sizzle across the short distance. The bright, burning projectiles struck the creature, searing its hide. It let out a horrifying shriek, half whale song, half grinding metal. The spines unfurled from the ship as if recoiling in pain. Another volley of flares erupted from the crew. The monster wailed, slamming 2 or 3 more tentacles onto the deck, knocking equipment and people aside. For an instant, I locked eyes with an opening on the creature's dome. Maybe an orifice or a cluster of sensory organs. It felt like staring into a cosmic abyss. That was the last coherent image I remember before I was thrown sideways, my head cracking against the storage bin. When I awoke, the deck was soaked with water, and the monstrous thing had partially withdrawn. The creature's mass receded into the sea with an unearthly groan. All around me, the ship was in ruin. The starboard side was badly crumpled, and the deck shimmered with sticky, black residue from the creature's flesh. We were sinking. The Pelagic Dawn took on water through multiple breaches. The captain yelled for everyone to abandon ship. Smoke rose from somewhere below deck, and I could smell the acrid tang of burning wires. The life rafts were unlashed in a frantic hurry. Alarms blared, and I grew dizzy from the chaos. Oliver helped me onto one of the inflatable rafts, then jumped in behind me. Others boarded, struggling to keep the raft stable. As the Pelagic Dawn tilted, I caught a final glimpse of that monstrous silhouette under the water. For half a beat, I thought it might rear up once more, dragging everyone to their doom. But perhaps the flares had truly injured it, because it slithered back into the depths. We cut the life raft's ropes and drifted away, watching in stunned silence as the Pelagic Dawn's stern rose higher and higher out of the water before it slid below the surface with a haunting moan of twisting metal. Drifting in that raft, we were numb, battered by the savage truth. We had been attacked by something that shouldn't exist. Time stretched into a hollow blur. Daylight came and went. A hum of fear permeated everything as we floated through a calm sea, ironically too calm for quick rescue. We had a small emergency locator beacon, but how far the signal carried, we could only guess. During long, silent hours, I stared at the horizon. I recalled all those stories, vanishings, monstrous creatures, unexplainable events. They'd once seemed like wild folklore, or half-truths from ancient mariners, or modern rumors shared in corners of the internet. But I'd seen the horrifying reality with my own eyes. That knowledge weighed on me like a lead anchor. Eventually, a cargo ship spotted our raft. Friendly voices and silhouettes loomed overhead, hauling us aboard. I collapsed in relief. We were rushed to the infirmary for treatment, pumped with fluids, fed warm meals. The cargo ship's crew listened to our story in disbelief, though they recognized our mayday call that had preceded the Pelagic Dawn's partial transmissions. At first, we were met with raised eyebrows. I could hardly blame them. A giant creature with spines that slashed metal, a wreck that seemed to harbor unnatural growth, cryptic signals in ancient Morse code. It all sounded like a fictional horror tale. In the next few days, as we approached a port, we discovered that no official record existed of any shipwreck in that area, nor any known marine species that fit our description of the attacking monster. As for the bizarre Morse code, no radio station claimed responsibility, and official maritime logs carried no mention of it. We recounted our experiences to the local authorities, who listened politely, though I could tell they doubted us. We had precious little proof. Our submersibles were destroyed. The Pelagic Dawn was gone with all its records. A handful of partial camera feeds retrieved from our waterlogged laptops were inconclusive. Grainy footage that might be interpreted as a giant mass of seaweed or rock formations. Maybe a few frames hinted at something more sinister, but not enough to be definitive. For a while, we scattered. Some of my surviving colleagues left oceanic research altogether, retreating to jobs or homes far from the sea. But for me, the nightmares never ceased. I saw again and again that mountainous black dome, those pale spines, the submersible's destroyed hull. When I close my eyes, I still hear that shriek that flooded my ears as we fired the flares, the sound that was part living creature and part tearing steel. Sometimes, I'm haunted by the image of the ROV's final footage inside the wreck, that creeping nest of tendrils, the memory of how the starboard hold filled with water, revealing a slithering coil from below, replays whenever a pipe rattles or a drain gurgles. The entire ordeal remains unspoken in official records. Maritime authorities chalked it up to a catastrophic structural failure of the Pelagic Dawn, a probable collision with an uncharted obstacle. Those of us who survived know the truth is far more horrifying. In quiet corners, among sea-worn men and women who've glimpsed the ocean's shadows, there are always hushed-voiced recollections of indescribable things that dwell in the deep. Some are purely rumors, sightings of giant siphonophores or destructive pods of orcas that tear boats apart. But other tales share harrowing similarities to ours. Ships that report an enormous shape rising from the depths, only to vanish with the next wave. Unsettling transmissions that come from no known vessel. Accounts of monstrous tentacles or spines that brandish inexplicable force. Some even speak of lost vessels never found, much like the Warada or the contradictory records of the Arang Medan. I tell this story for one reason: someone must know what really happened. The ocean is vast and teeming with wonders beyond our comprehension, but it also harbors nightmares. The open sea, for all its beauty, can be a stage for horrors that defy everything we think we know about life on Earth. I don't claim to understand what that creature was, or how it ravaged our ship. All I know is that I lived through it. I can't set foot on a vessel anymore. Every time a harbor breeze hits my face, I'm yanked back to the memory of the Pelagic Dawn sinking beneath that cold, merciless water. Some nights, I hear a faint, faraway screech that could be the wind, or perhaps that monstrous entity calling, as if it still hunts for the survivors that escaped, and I am certain it's still out there, gliding through the tides, waiting to pull unsuspecting souls under. Most horrifying of all is the thought that perhaps it isn't just one creature. Maybe entire colonies or families exist in the ocean's unexplored depths. My name is Jane, and I write this account from a small coastal clinic where I'm recovering from injuries and shock. Every day, I am reminded of how fragile we are compared to the fathomless expanse. Most people view the sea as an untamed wilderness, dangerous but ultimately knowable. They think humanity's mastery of technology has rendered the oceans merely challenging, not terrifying. But I have seen the fallacy of that assumption. There are corners of the sea we can't begin to map or predict, and in those corners linger nightmares that can effortlessly bend metal or fill a ship's corridors with shadows that move of their own accord. We force our science on oceans that have their own laws, regions of swirling currents, and hidden ridges where impossible life forms may dwell. We reduce miles of water column to a line on a chart and call it understood. If only they knew, if only they had witnessed the submersible's lights shining onto that black dome, or the writhing coil in our starboard hold. Then they would realize how foolish it is to underestimate the deep. The cargo ship left me in a nearby port. In the hospital bed, I heard local fishermen spin tall tales about sea monsters, never suspecting my story might surpass theirs in horror. Once I'm discharged, I'd planned to keep low, but I can't keep silent. Eventually, these horrors may surface again, perhaps in the nets of deep-sea trawlers, or in the recording instruments of a new wave of oceanographers. If or when those future souls face the same creature, I pray they are better prepared. But something tells me that no level of preparation can match a monstrosity older and stronger than we can fathom. Some nights, I wake in terror, certain I'm back on the Pelagic Dawn as it lists, the hull howling while that nightmarish shape rises from the depths to claim us. That's the price for having witnessed it with my own eyes. And for those who disbelieve, I envy their ignorance, because I know, somewhere out there in the endless, black frontier of the ocean, it waits. And if you listen closely, if you dare, you might hear its call echoing across the waves like a corrupted Morse signal. You might see that black dome slip beneath the surface, trailing pale spines behind it, and you might finally learn what the sea can hide, as we did on that ill-fated voyage. I have no illusions that my testimony will be accepted as fact. But I swear on my life, everything I've described is exactly how I remember it. The Pelagic Dawn was real. Our research mission was real. Our screams and our terror were real. And the living darkness we encountered beneath the waves was no figment of a fevered mind. Perhaps one day, investigators will comb the ocean floor for the wreck of the Pelagic Dawn, as search teams have for the missing Warada, discovering only battered steel and unanswered questions. Or maybe they'll find nothing at all, only broken illusions in the shifting silt, leaving them to wonder, did it even happen? But I know the truth. We encountered something older and more horrific than any sea myth. And although I survived, each day I fear it will remember me, and come searching again in the endless darkness that belongs to it alone. This is my story. This is my warning. If you ever find yourself far out at sea, on a night when no other ships or planes are within reach, pay attention to the water. Watch the waves carefully, and if you glimpse a black dome rising in the gloom, flecked by pale, bony spines, light every flare you have. Pray you can drive it away, as we barely did, for there are places in this world where nightmares swim, and the deep might devour us all if we venture too far into its domain. References. The Warada vanished off the coast of South Africa. The Orang Medan reportedly sent out a terrifying distress call. Oil rig workers claimed to have seen an octopus snatching sharks. Someone once described a monstrous force snapping a mast. A submarine heard a bizarre screeching that couldn't be identified. The flip platform nearly got overtaken by 80-foot swells. William Hope Hodgson was known for eerie maritime horror stories. Asterisk.